Day 3 of the pallet wood shed build began in my workshop, where I wanted to cut some pieces to size before heading to Alex's. I pulled out this 2x4 and cut it to small blocks which I'd use later to prop up one side of the roof to create a slope so that the rain would run off it. I cut these to length on the miter saw. I cut the sides of these pieces at a 13-degree angle on the table saw. 13 degrees was just a rough guess at what the angle of the sloped roof might be. Again, there was very little precision involved in the making of this shed. I also cut some small wedges from some scraps of plywood and drilled some pilot holes. These would support one of the front panels, which I'll explain about later. Once back in Alex's garden, I attached the first roof block. I used a 10mm drill bit to hog out some depth into the 2x2 for the screws to sit in, and then used a smaller 2mm drill bit within that hole to drill a pilot hole for the screw. Then I screwed them in place. The plywood wedges that I cut earlier were screwed to the front of the side panel in the 80-degree corner. These wedges were used to position the front panel at the same angle as the panel at the other side of the shed. I added a top brace to join the two side panels together at the front. I used another offcut of plywood for this. I screwed it in place and then cut it to size with a handsaw. Then I found a centre point for the top brace. This is where we would need to add a central column which would support the roof. I used another piece of 2x2 to create this column. I cut it to size with a handsaw and then secured it with screws from the top down. Then I checked the positioning with a spirit level. And secured from the bottom up too, by tilting the shed structure. Then I made a start on cladding the roof with some more plywood offcuts. I cut the pieces to size with a circular saw, using a straight edge to guide the fence of the saw. I could then attach the next roof support block in the same way as I had the first, positioned centrally so that it would support the first piece of plywood and the next piece too. I did the same for the third roof support block, and so on. This is where I found out that the 13-degree angle that I'd guessed at when I cut the roof support blocks actually worked out pretty well. I secured the plywood to the structure using more drywall screws. I left between a 20 and 30mm overhang at the edges of the plywood to create a drip edge for rainfall. Meanwhile, Alex painted some white primer onto the back panel. The final piece of plywood for the roof needed to be cut to the same angle as the side panel had been positioned, so I measured this up, again adding 20 to 30mm as an overhang, and cut the angle and secured it in place. With the roof cladded, I could then fill in the gaps to complete the back panel. These pieces were placed horizontally, and unfortunately the pallet slats we had remaining were slightly too wide, so I used a circular saw to nibble away a few millimetres off the edge. Then the pieces slotted in nicely with a bit of hammer persuasion, and I screwed them to the roof support blocks. Then I could cut some filler pieces for the side panels too. I carefully measured, marked up and cut out some more pallet wood with a jigsaw. And attached with screws to the roof support block and from the top down through the plywood roof. I also added a couple of narrow filler pieces at the back of the side panels to fill the gap that was created by the protruding horizontal beams that formed the back panel. To fill the gaps that had appeared from the side panels being stored indoors and the wood drying out and contracting, I added some more pieces of plywood to the inside of the shed. It started getting dark at this point, and we finished day 3 by painting the rest of the structure, apart from the roof sheets, with more white primer. And finally we did a test fit with Alex's bike.
Fits.
On day 4 we needed to get started on making the doors for the shed. I sorted through the 1200mm lengths of pallet wood that we had available and organised them so that the neatest faces would form the front of the door. The first door would need to be around 1100mm in width in order for it to reach the upright centre column on the shed. I added 3 more pieces of the pallet wood perpendicular to the other pieces, near the top, near the bottom and in the middle of the door. I used clamps to hold the pieces together tighter while adding the screws, which I hoped would minimise any gaps appearing in the door when the wood dries out as the seasons change. I didn't use any wood glue here, as that would result in the wood splitting as it expands and contracts in the future. I did use wood glue though to fix any split pieces. Unfortunately I didn't have my large framing square with me, so to make sure that the door was square, I measured from corner to corner to check the measurements matched. I did this after adding every couple of slats. If the measurements were out by a few millimetres at any point, I could make some slight adjustments to correct it and keep everything square. When adding the final pieces, I positioned the door upright on its side so that I could apply downward pressure while adding the screws, as I didn't have any large clamps with me either. I wanted to add some diagonal cross braces to the door. These should help to stop the door twisting out of shape over time. I positioned these, marked up the angles by eye, cut with a handsaw, and then screwed them in place. Finally, I could chop off the excess at the sides using a handsaw. and trim a few millimetres from the top and bottom of the door with the circular saw and a straight edge guiding the saw to cut everything flush. It was a cold winter day and we kept warm by burning some of the offcuts of pallet wood.
You're going to put that in your video program?
Sure am.
Keep them warm.